The following interview is sponsored by Eastport Critical Metals. Please do your own due diligence before making any investment decision. Hello, everybody. Welcome into Commodity Culture. My name is Jesse Day. Today is August 12th, 2026, and my guest today is the CEO of Eastport Critical Metals, a critical minerals development company advancing 6 projects in Botswana. It is Daniel Major. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Jesse, for the invite.
I want to talk about the critical minerals segment more broadly at first, and then I want to dive into specifically Eastport Critical Metals. So I would like to get your assessment of the critical minerals landscape today in this era of geopolitical uncertainty and supply chain fragmentation. Is now a time, perhaps more than ever, to bring online critical minerals exploration, development, and production outside of China and other nations that could be considered rivals to the West?
I think the simple answer to that is yes, absolutely. But I don't think it's a short-term problem that we're looking at. It's not a now problem. This is a long one. I mean, I was actually doing a bit of looking to set up for this call, and I see the first region that put in a critical mineral list was actually the EU back in 2011. And then Canada did one in 2021. The US actually came a bit earlier. They came in 2018. But what I thought was interesting looking at the US one was in 2018, they had 35 minerals. In 2025, 60 minerals. So it shows how the time has changed. Now, admittedly, one of those is that they had in 2018 rare earths, just a blanket. It was just said rare earth elements, whereas now they've broken them apart. But you just think the US now, half of the periodic table is now classified as a critical mineral in the US critical minerals. So I mean, it's a real change. But I think the other thing that's changed there as well, when you look at the difference, copper was not in 2018. It is now in 2025, has been the way that they have looked at critical minerals as well. So obviously an understanding for data centers, you need copper as a primary supply. So that's been added because it's changed the geopolitical view. The other issue as well being AI and more importantly, defense. So I think you've had a change as well as what's classified as a critical mineral and why. And that's been exacerbated obviously by the tariff wars, export quotas that are coming in as well and driving this security issue. And I'm really, you've got to highlight that one by yesterday's announcement from Japan that exports from China on critical metals down 50% from a year previously. So big change through there. And it's affecting price. I mean, you've got the divergence of price as well for rare earths, like 3 to 5 times higher ex-China than it is in China as well going forward. But I think we also have to be cognizant that a lot of these critical minerals, and pretty well everything is a critical mineral now, as we just highlighted, is that on a lot of these ones, particularly the ones that we all think about critical, the rare earths, etc., actually they're quite small components in a lot of things that they're needed for. So if you look at a car, you know, it's a 3% of the total car on an EV car. So if you increase the cost by 3 times, it's less than 0.1% of the value of the car actually changes. But if that's in energy storage, it's about 25%, in which case it's a 5%. So I think, that's there. But the governments have responded. I mean, obviously you've got Project Vault across the world. Different governments are doing different things. So very much time. I think those of us that worked in Africa as well have seen this for a long time. This geopolitical push-pull between the US and China over getting hold of assets in Africa, particularly Zambia being a very good one, where you've now got the Loboto corridor going one way and then the Tanzanian railway going the other way, one funded by the US, the other one funded by the Chinese. So it's not new, but I think it's getting more important geopolitically and continues to get more important geopolitically, and there is going to be an ongoing struggle between governments and that. And you've got not just China, not just the US, you've got Japan pushing hard, the European Union also pushing to develop critical minerals. So it is going to be a wider spread.
You mentioned copper there. I'd like to home in on that because it's been hitting all-time highs several times this year, even in the aftermath of the war in Iran kicking off, an event that has tended to put downward pressure on commodities, particularly gold and silver. Why do you think copper has held up so well, and what are your overall thoughts on the trajectory of the copper market right now?
Yeah, I think in the short term, I mean, let's look at the short term issues. You've had disruptions in direct supply, whether it's Grasberg, Kamoa, export reductions out of the DRC, sulfuric acid supply and water issues in Chile have all put pressure on the supply coming through. The other factor that's driving in there is obviously tariffs. The on-off pull of tariffs and stockpiling into the US has also been supporting prices going forward. So you've got the short-term push-pulls, but I think at the end of the day, people are looking out there at that long term, which is one of the reasons why we have copper in Eastport. You know, as I was reading an IEA report the other day, and they talk about the age of electricity. That's the headline, the age of electricity. And this is all, everything that we've got in Eastport, and I'll come back to that, is related to electricity, the demand for electricity. I think the long-term growth for electricity in general is about 3.6% all the way out to 2040. I mean, we're looking at incredible growth, whether it's EVs, data centers, grid, modernization, urbanization, all of these things going forward. And I think in copper, you're looking at the moment, demand at about 28 million. You've got supply, mine supply at 22. The rest is being made up at the moment by recycling. And recycling will always be there. And whether it can increase its percentage is going to be the issue. But your 2040, you're looking at demand at about 35 million. But you're looking at supply peaking out at about 25 million in 2030 on existing and planned projects. Now, admittedly, you know, we can see new projects coming on, but like all commodities, and it covers, and we'll come on to that, onto others, is, you know, projects taking longer to get online. They've got making it more difficult to get them financed, risk, etc. So, you know, that ability to miss production pipelines is still there. And you are looking at a structural deficit there that sits at risk.
Perhaps no example is more stark when it comes to China's control of the commodity space than the rare earths business, where China controls the vast majority of processing, along with 60 to 70% of global rare earths production. Walk us through this conundrum on the supply side and how it can be addressed moving forward.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think most of the news on critical minerals relates to rare earths. I mean, and that's what most people put out there as their first thought on critical minerals. And it does. I mean, it controls, you know, 80 to 90% of the processing of the downstream, with the majority of the mining. But we are seeing mining sort of developing in other regions going forward. And I think the other thing that makes it worse as well with China is these export tariffs that they're putting on. As we talked earlier, you know, Japan's just had its reduced by 50%. So it's not just controlling the refining, it's controlling who it sells to as well going out. And I think that's the bigger problem that we're sitting here now in our industry. We're getting a complete bifurcation of industries. And you're seeing that on the pricing, you know, with that 3 to 5 times higher outside of China for rare earths than you are paying inside of China. But governments are responding to that, obviously. I mean, you've seen in the US a lot of investment in rare earth projects. And I think there's also been an awakening up, particularly that it's not just about mining, it's more about processing. But you have to have projects, you've got to have the whole process stream in place and catch up to it. And there's been a lot of good articles on this recently. I think there was an assumption this would take a long time, but I think that, you know, the US and other parts, Japan particularly, they've had a lot of history in this anyway, and they're accelerating through. And, you know, the best thing to support an industry is high prices, and this external high price is doing a lot for that. I think the other thing on that building, though, that we have to recognize is that there is a strong demand going out. 50 to 90% growth is the demand by 2040 for rare earths, but it depends which one you're in as well. And a lot of this pipeline is following the easier metals as well, the light rare earths particularly. And it's the heavy rare earths that still need to be resolved, the terbium, the dysprosiums. Those are the ones that I think investors as well have got to look at, the projects that have those, because they aren't that common around. There's a lot of projects with high grade, but a lot of those grades are light rare earths. They're not the heavy rare earths that are coming through. And that's something we're certainly looking at our Semarula project for, because we can see we've got DY and TB in that, but just got to figure out the grades on it. So with that RE, it's those magnet ones that are the most important.
The bull case for uranium is getting stronger than ever, in my opinion. And like many assets, the equities have seen a ton of volatility as of late. Would you say we're still early in the uranium cycle here? Because obviously the whole thing kind of kicked off in terms of this bull market kind of started 2020. Some might argue 2018 is when things started to move. And a lot of money has already been made. You know, Rick Rule famously says the big money's being made, or the easy money's being made, but the sure money is ahead of us in uranium. What's your thought on where we are in the uranium cycle right now?
Yeah, for someone who's just spent 13 years in that industry, you kind of felt the pain going down. But I mean, in my view, I mean, when you look at the sorry, when you look at the bottom of that market, which is what, November 2016, it went down to like $18 a pound. I mean, it was brutal around that time, and getting projects through was hard. But it kind of moved up, and then finally Sprott fund came in and started buying, and that really shook the market up at that point. It did what it needed to do. It broke through the $35 benchmark. It was just sitting, couldn't get past. But I think, you know, the story remains the same for uranium. We're looking at this long-term growth in energy demand, and from all sources. And on nuclear, it's about 3.5%. You're looking, what, 420 gigawatts of capacity out there at the moment, going up to somewhere between 550 and 700 gigawatts by 2040. You know, so you've got this incredible growth rate in front of us that needs to be there. And it's not just one area now. It's not just China story or waiting for Japan to restart its reactors. It's across the board. Europe, US, everybody. The SMRs are bringing a whole new part to that recipe as well. And you've seen a lot of push on that side. So you're looking at demand at the moment going from what, 180 million pounds to 320 million pounds. Supply 160, but it's going to struggle to get much past 200 without new projects. And it's not just about price for those new projects. There just aren't projects out there in the pipeline ready to go. Some of our older, bigger mines are coming to the end of their lives going forward. You know, so I think there is a lot of legs. I mean, the market as well, from an equity point of view, tends to just follow the spot price anyway. So the stock price is, you know, somewhat staggering along at, I say staggering along at 86. I mean, considering we were back at 18, I'll take 86 any day. I mean, that's a great place to be. But the term contract, which you know is about 80% of the market, is at 96, and talk of much higher prices out there. So, you know, if you're looking at the overall market, there's ways to go. But the equities will go back to where the price is. And the real price is up there at that long-term contract price and will continue. And you just need a bit of tightening on somebody needing some metal. And I think that's the one thing people don't always watch. If you look at that forward curve on demand, that they always say, oh, you know, it's great in the future, but it's usually quite capped in the short term because they've covered their contracts. But as soon as that starts to be uncovered short term, which it will, then this is when this market will really kick off going forward. So, you know, the fundamentals for uranium, absolutely brilliant.
Completely agree. Let's talk about how Eastport Critical Metals fits into all of this. Why don't you start by giving us an overview of the company and lay out your long-term vision for us?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I mean, I'm new to this company. I mean, a month and a half now, but I came to Eastport because I like the portfolio of projects. We've got a range of them. And what is interesting is they all relate to electricity demand. And I certainly believe in the sort of age of electricity and where we're going to in electricity demand. You know, and that's what we're all moving towards on a mining point of view. Is why most metals are now sitting on the critical minerals list, because they all relate to electricity demand one way or the other, unless they're defense. So if you go through them kind of scale-wise, we start with Matsutama. It's a large copper exploration ground, about 2,000 square kilometers, sitting up near Francistown. A lot of exploration potential. It's got 2 copper mines, one at either end. Capano running at about 2% copper, about 40 million tons. The smaller one at Takadu running at about 1%. There's copper everywhere on that project. I mean, literally everywhere. And we'll come back to these in detail, I assume. Then the next one I would go to would be Semarula, early stage rare earth project, less than hours drive from Gaborone. Really big cyanide geological structure. We've drilled some holes into it. Continuous mineralization based on an XRF for rare earths. Could be really big. We'll wait and see where that one goes to. Then if I jump back north, we end up with our Salibi East project right next to Next Metal's Salibi mine. Very similar geology, really interesting early stage exploration. You've got Foley Uranium right next to Lefrakani. Lotus's uranium projects and recent drilling there showed that we've got new mineralization extending there. And then we got Zhuaneng for diamonds and Keng, which is sort of nickel PGM, but they're much lower priority projects within our portfolio. So an interesting band, very much linked to that energy supply story.
Well, let's focus in on the projects that are most top of mind for yourself and for the company in terms of how you're advancing these various properties. Where is your focus right now? And on the properties that are your focus, could you dive into some details, infrastructure in place, milestones achieved so far, future plans, anything else you think is important?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's go back to Matsutama. It's right up near Francistown. I say the one thing I have enjoyed is coming back to Botswana. As a country, I was last here in the early 90s when it was dirt road everywhere. And now you can drive from Gaborone to Francistown in 5.5 hours on a nice, comfortable road. There's power everywhere. Every village with more than 200 people has power. And the one thing that I think shocked me more than anything else, and I think most people in the Western Hemisphere will understand, you stop at a traffic light or a junction, there's no rubbish. There is nothing, not a tin can, not a bottle, piece of paper, nothing. It is an incredible country from that point of view, and the government and well educated. So, great jurisdiction to be in as well. And so we're right here up at Francistown. You can just drive through on the road to Arapa. You go about 500 meters off the dirt road and in the dirt road, and we're right at our camp. It is 2,000 square kilometers of exploration with these two copper mines, one at either end. Within the project, we have a small resource already called Nakalakwana. It's about 10 million pounds, running at about 0.5%. But what we have seen, and we've done some recent drilling on that, one, to confirm that NAC main was true, based on the historical drilling, and to understand the structure, how it worked in that area. And just, this is a structurally driven copper project. It's clearly sourced from deep down, whether it's porphyry or IOCG, it's still to be defined. But there's clearly a lot of copper. If you look at it from a soil anomaly, the whole thing's yellow. Like the whole project here is yellow. I've got a piece of malachite up here I just found next to a trench, just lying there. We've got intersections at well over 100 meters of copper running at 0.1 to 0.2% copper. So there's a lot of copper in this system. But the parts of it have never been explored, and particularly on the northern boundary of it, we have some very high soil anomalies up there. There is a bit of drilling, but it's only down to about 40 meters. But there's some really big structures there as well. So we've got folding, massive amount of folding. You've got the geology twisted together, and then you've got structure through that as well. And that's where our highest soil anomalies are as well. So the target for that one really in the next year or so is to go in and redo our geophysics. We're going to have to go and drill deeper. We need to do geophysics over it, fully understand where our targets are. We've proven with the drilling already down at NAC that it's structural, and we can see how that trend goes through. And then once we figured out with the geophysics, start drilling down. But I'm super excited about what I'm seeing up in that part. If I go to Semarula, on that one, next step now is really just to understand the mineralogy for it. And then we'll continue to step out drilling to define the resource there. As I say, when you've got big, long holes at 330 meters in length and they're just mineralized all the way through, we need to understand the scale. And, we know in this industry on the rare earths, it's all about the downstream. And if we can prove up our dysprosium, particularly our terbiums, our NdPrs as well, then that's going to be the key to this project and how it can be processed. Looks relatively straightforward so far. If I look at Salibi, as I said, right next to Next Metal. I mean, they're running, a copper equivalent at something like 5 to 6% is their copper equivalent grade at the Salibi mine. They've got, well, they mined 40 million tons of copper nickel ore out of there already. There's 28 million tons left over in reserves, and they're drilling and just adding to it all the time. But what is interesting, the original mine was found by doing soil geochemistry over the geology, and it tied in with the amphibolites, the mafics, ultramafics, exactly. And they drilled those, and that's how they found the project. So we've just done that stage. In fact, we've just put our press release out on that one, and getting a really good correlation between the mapped amphibolites and the soil anomaly. So we'll go back and do some EM work on that to find our targets for that one as well, and drive forward to where that's going. On the other three, I'm going to sit down next week and actually figure out what our target is going to be. We've found uranium obviously at Foley. Whether we keep progressing it, this then becomes really a strategic question. You can't drive all projects at the same time. You've got to figure out the ones. And I certainly think Matsutama is a straightforward, simple one. It's copper. Most investors like copper. That's going to be our driving force. Semarula has to move forward as a critical mineral. And the Salibi is quite low cost at the moment from an exploration point of view. So we'll keep that one moving. And with what we're seeing next door and the development of the Salibi mine, we have to move forward with that project.
Well, you've discussed Matsutama, the copper project, but you've also recently announced drill results from that project, including a confirmation of extensive copper mineralization. Could you dive into the details and how those results will inform your work at the project from here on out?
Yeah, as I was saying just now in that sort of coverage, this is very structural. Everything we see around Matsutama is related to structure. And we needed to understand that and how it fitted. So there were two parts to that. One, the first announcement we put out was related to NAC main, and understanding if those old results were correct. They were before our time. And they did. They matched up beautifully. And you can see there's a potential resource there. And it's structure. So the other ones were to go east and west from it and to define along where we perceive the structures to be and drill down on those. Those at NAC East particularly, which are 5 kilometers away on there, came through with these long intersections, over 100 meters, say between 0.1 and 0.2, with some good intersections in between. I mean, some really good intersections in between. But it was more about understanding, one, the structure, two, if we had extension, but three, just to really prove that there is so much copper. You don't get 100-meter intersections in copper without there being a lot of copper here. And so, we now have to sit down here and figure out, what's the next step? Do we continue at NAC, or as I said, do we go up to La Pache instead, where I think really that's where our real target is. No drilling done before at all. Our biggest structures are up there, the biggest soil anomalies. I mean, there's a high soil anomaly up there. It's 30 kilometers long in this long twisting snake shape where all of the geology, the rock mapping as well, is just twisted and into folds, and those of us like geology and like mining know the place you want to go and find big deposits is right where there's bends, as everything traps in bends. And then if you look at it, the bends have got folds right through the middle of them as well. So faults are the things that crack open the earth to let the juice get in. Copper's very mobile, so it's going to want to come through these. So we've shown extensions possible. We've shown big intersection of copper is available on the property. We've shown structure. It works for us. So we've proven up the model. We now need to prove that model works in the right places to get us the big resource that we need to find.
Let's talk about Botswana as a jurisdiction for a moment. I've spoken to a few other companies who operate there, and from all accounts, it's a very stable area to operate as a mining company. I wonder what your experience has been in Botswana, what the relationship is like with the local government, how supportive they are of the mining industry, and relationship with the local community as well.
I've worked in Africa 25 of my 35 years in this industry. I have to say Botswana is probably one of the easiest countries that I have ever had the pleasure of working in this part of the world. It is highly developed, technically developed as well. Excellent infrastructure across the country, wherever you go. I mean, as I said earlier, it's a pleasure just to be able to drive to every project and be on a main road. And just drive. I mean, I was we were driving up to Francistown, for example, and as we're going past, they go, we're driving past our Foley project now, and it's right there by the fence. And then coming back from Matsutama in a different route, and they go, well, that's the Salibi project over that fence. And I'm like, here on a double lane highway. I'm like, oh, okay, that's all right. And the ground is flat. So I was like, well, don't bother going to do a site visit because I can see what it looks like all the way in. So, so from that point of view, absolutely brilliant. Electricity cables are all over the place, and the government's spending a lot of money at the moment with private investment as well to put more power on. There's a company building a 900 megawatt coal-fired power station at the moment. There's a lot of solar going in as well. I mean, the people I'm dealing with, coming in, I've got a great team of geologists. They're well educated. They've been in this industry. Government, the short time that I've been there, they're very open in discussions on things. They're putting new regulations through that relate to an act that's already there, but it's a very open communication that I'm seeing as well. Whereas in other governments I've seen, put an act out and then just change the regs in the background. This isn't. It's very open. They understand that they have to diversify from diamonds, and to do that, they need the other parts of the mining industry to grow as well. So, everybody notes, they're number 7 in the world on the Fraser Institute, number 1 in Africa as well. This is a really world-class jurisdiction to work in.
What are the main upcoming catalysts and news flow that shareholders of Eastport Critical Metals should be looking forward to for the remainder of 2026?
Yeah, so we just put the one out for Salibi. Literally, it's going out while we're doing this interview. That's one. Have a look at that. And then we've got another couple of press releases coming out, one for Matsutama, some remaining holes. We've got the Semarula holes coming out as they come through. So that'll be our 3 big projects, all with news flow coming through. I'm going down into Botswana next week to sit down and figure out what the full strategy is going to be, and then look for us to continue to give news flow on each of our projects going forward. I've got to time what we do from a geophysical point of view and what we do from a drilling point of view. So I think a lot of the early news is going to relate more to geophysics and targeting. With the exception of Semarula, where we know it's just going to go straight into drilling. But those are going to be the step changes going forward. And as we go into 2027, that's going to be targeting where we're drilling at Matsutama, where we're going to be drilling at Salibi. So I think there's a lot of excitement going on here. And I think that's the one point I have to make to people. It is a diversified company. It has different projects. While we really push forward on something like Matsutama, recognizes value out of all 3 of these, and any one of these could be a real company maker. And I think, in my view, each of them could be in an individual company on their own right. They are such good projects.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to put a link in the description below to Eastport Critical Metals website, as well as social media for people who want to follow along with the company. Daniel, fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.